is CGTN, China Global Television Network. Live from London, this is The World Today.
Hello, I'm Robin Dwyer. Welcome to the programme. Our top stories. Warnings of a global economic crisis. Chinese President Xi Jinping hosts the leaders of Russia, Brazil, India and South Africa. At least 1,000 people are killed and others are feared trapped under rubble as an earthquake hits Afghanistan. And Russia commemorates its Second World War dead as its troops continue to make gains in eastern Ukraine. The world economy is close to crisis. That's the warning from China's President Xi Jinping. He was speaking at the BRICS Forum of major emerging economies, including Russia, India, Brazil and South Africa. President Xi again called for an end to economic sanctions, comparing them to a double-edged sword. It's the first summit of its kind with Vladimir Putin since the invasion of Ukraine began. Well, our correspondent Dong Shui was listening to President Xi's speech. So, Shui, what else did President Xi say?
Well, Robin, as we're talking, the BRICS Business Forum is still underway with a lot of, sub-panel discussions. The forum actually kicked off an hour ago with Chinese President Xi Jinping's address calling for embracing solidarity, coordination, and jointly maintaining, the world peace and stability. The president stressed that to reach out to each other and jointly promote sustainable global developments, tide over difficulties, and pursue win-win cooperation. BRICS members should be inclusive and jointly expand openness and integration. He said, and I quote, "We in the international community should reject zero-sum games and jointly oppose hegemonianism and power politics. We should also build a new type of international relations based on mutual respect, fairness, justice, and win-win cooperation," unquote. The BRICS leaders, Russian President Vladimir Putin, Brazil's President Jair Bolsonaro, India's Prime Minister Narendra Modi, and South Africa's President Cyril Ramaphosa all delivered speeches via video, with most of them calling for more cooperation among members. They also shared for boosting and reducing barriers to international trade. Also, a bit of background information on the forum. The forum is held in Beijing on the sideline of the 14th BRICS Summit and in both online and offline formats. This year's theme was deepening BRICS business partnership and jointly creating a brighter future for the global development. Robin.
And as you say, other world leaders speaking, including the Russian president. What can you tell us about that?
Well, as I mentioned earlier, that most of all the BRICS leaders had called for more, cooperations among the BRICS members, especially the developing countries and emerging markets. And they also shared the calls for boosting and reducing barriers for international trade against, the COVID-19 pandemic backdrop. Russia's President Vladimir Putin also echoed President Xi's call for multilateralism in trade and slammed Western sanctions, which threatened its own interests, as he said. Putin also emphasized that BRICS should have played a significant role in the global economy. Mentions that the BRICS bloc is working on a new global payments system to, reduce the dependence on the used to be the U.S. dollars global payment system. Robin.
Dong Shui in Beijing, thank you. Well, Isabel Hilton is the founder and senior advisor of China Dialogue. I asked her how these emerging economies will be impacted by the war in Ukraine and fears of a global recession.
We are living in a very volatile world, and BRICS countries are affected affected as much, if not more than the rest of the world. I mean, we have one member of BRICS that's invaded a sovereign country, and that makes the rest of the world ask what the other members really think, especially since the impacts of that invasion in energy price spikes, in food shortages, and in what is now widely predicted, as you say, to be a global recession, will inevitably hit some BRICS members very hard. And Brazil is not going to do very well. South Africa probably won't do very well. India is currently the fastest growing economy in the world, but there are certainly clouds on the horizon with a global recession for India too. So if BRICS plans were to support sustainable development and the Paris Agreement, as they proudly declared in 2019, those plans are really very much off course.
And you mentioned some of the fallout caused by the Russia-Ukraine conflict. The problems to world trade will be a key issue. Are we expecting any significant moves from BRICS on this?
I think it's quite difficult for BRICS to make a lot of impact on that. You may see some bilateral deals on Paris, but there's a structural problem with BRICS in terms of having a major effect on international trade, and that's because although BRICS represents 3 billion people and it's got a combined GDP of $16 trillion, and that is undoubtedly big, the problem is that it's not big as a bloc. So all the members are very different. They don't have a lot of synergies between them, and they don't have the kind of coherence as a group to allow them to exercise very solid economic power. So, for example, if you look at how they trade with each other, you know, China's trade with South Korea is bigger than the whole of its trade with BRICS members. China's trade with the European Union or the United States, again, is very much bigger. So, you know, China's trade with the rest of the world is 12 times higher than its trade with the BRICS. So it's very difficult to exercise a meaningful power as a trade bloc with that kind of disparity. And there are other problems, including the fact that, for example, Brazil is a member of Mercosur, and members of Mercosur can't do trade deals. They have to do a trade deal as a bloc. So again, to operate as BRICS, Mercosur would have to have separate trade deals with each of the BRICS members.
And we have another potential new member of BRICS in the shape of Argentina, with the support of China and of Brazil. What are the pros and cons of expanding BRICS?
I think Argentina would like to be aligned with what is, you know, the foremost grouping of emerging economies. Argentina itself is yet again in big economic trouble. And the difficulty with expanding BRICS is that it operates by consensus, and not everyone is as keen as China on the expansion. India's got quite a lot of reservations. Brazil, despite, you know, ostensibly supporting Argentina, doesn't really want to see its own position within BRICS diluted. So I think there will be a lot of, you know, expressions of goodwill, but unless we get a serious agreement on a rewritten set of rules where it doesn't have to operate in the same way by consensus, and that's a very different organization, I think it's going to be quite slow and tricky.
Russia has been marking the anniversary of the Nazi invasion of the Soviet Union in 1941. President Putin laid flowers to honor the war dead at a ceremony in Moscow. It comes as Russian forces are reported to have taken control of more areas in Ukraine's eastern Luhansk region. Well, let's talk now to our correspondent Stuart Smith in Moscow, and a reminder that correspondents in Russia are working under media laws that restrict what they can report. So, Stuart, what is the significance of this year's commemorations in light of the invasion of Ukraine?
Well, it's called the Day of Remembrance and Sorrow, and the Ministry of Foreign Affairs spokesperson Maria Zakharova was speaking about exactly that, how what happened then 81 years ago, as the Great Patriotic War, as it's known here, began, relates to what Russia considers it's doing with its so-called special military operation in Ukraine, the phrase the Russian government uses to describe its actions. Now, Maria Zakharova made the obvious claim, as we've heard so many times, that it believes this is a fight against a resurgence of Nazism in Ukraine, that Russia is fighting neo-Nazis in the government and in the armed forces. And she emphasized that she believes Russia is freeing Ukraine from neo-Nazi dominance, which had been fed there by, she said, Western partners. She, in her statement to journalists, equated NATO with the Third Reich, and she had specific comments about the consequences for German-Russian reconciliation. She says that German authorities are to blame for a decline in relations between the two countries, that Berlin jeopardizes the efforts made by Russia for decades to overcome post-war enmity. And she also suggested Germany had been conducting for years an anti-Russian propaganda campaign which had provoked a wave of unmotivated aggression bordering on mass psychosis against Russia. Now, she also suggested that the build-up of German forces as part of any NATO contingent threatened what happened again 81 years ago. So making it very clear how Russia feels about Germany's activities when it comes to supporting Ukraine. Of course, we can't right now get a good sense of whether the people's opinions here in Russia, the civilian population, also feels that this is equivalent in terms of what could be happening.
And Stuart, what can you tell us about possible sanctions against Lithuania, which is caught up in this row about the transport of EU goods to Kaliningrad?
Yeah, the Kremlin talked about this today to journalists and described the process as ongoing in terms of what those responses might be. We did get some hint of detail from the Ministry of Foreign Affairs, which suggested any reaction would be practical and not diplomatic, i.e. this won't be about expelling diplomats or anything like that. This will be practical measures taken by Kaliningrad or by Russia or the rest of Russia in order to try and potentially use mirror sanctions, for example, which have been talked about by the Kaliningrad governor. He suggested trade disruption might be one of the items on the table, but Dmitry Peskov, the Kremlin spokesperson, was saying Russia will not be rushed when it comes to the specific form or timing of the response. The main thing, he said, is to counteract unfriendly steps. The Kaliningrad governor, in an interview to Russian state media, was talking about how so far these changes have affected citizens or residents of Kaliningrad. He says so far their lives have not been affected, that there has been a run on building materials, but not due to shortage so much as panic buying. He's insisting people should remain calm. Everything will be sorted out, he says, and he's going to leave it for the government here in Moscow to work out what the appropriate response might be.
Stuart Smith in Moscow, many thanks. A powerful earthquake in Afghanistan has killed at least 1,000 people and injured hundreds more. Rescuers are still trying to reach many of those affected in remote and mountainous regions in the country's southeast. The epicenter of the 5.9 magnitude quake was near the city of Khost, close to the Pakistan border, but tremors were felt as far away as India. Well, Tawab Zafarzai is a freelance journalist in Kabul, and he joins us now. Welcome to you, Tawab. Describe for us, if you can, the situation as you know it in the areas that have been worst hit by this earthquake. Unfortunately, we can't hear from Tawab Zafarzai. Hopefully, we will be able to get back to him later in the programme. You're watching CGTN. Still ahead, why changing the law on human rights might make it easier for the UK to send asylum seekers to Rwanda.
There's a new agenda for a new world, accelerating change in almost every part of our lives. It's shifting the norms of how we work, travel, and connect. How we think, interact, and develop. It's a new reality, a new agenda with me, Juliet Mann.
Ever wondered what's the difference between a bear and a bull market? Where are the cash cows? And who are the lame ducks? And what exactly are black swans? Grey rhinos? And unicorn companies? Make sense of it all with Global Business, only on CGTN.
Welcome back. A reminder of our top stories. Warnings of a global economic crisis. Chinese President Xi Jinping hosts the leaders of Russia, Brazil, India and South Africa. At least 1,000 people are killed in Afghanistan and others are feared trapped under rubble as an earthquake hits the country. And Russia commemorates its Second World War dead as its troops continue to make gains in eastern Ukraine. UK Deputy Prime Minister Dominic Raab says a British Bill of Rights will strengthen what he calls the nation's proud tradition of freedom. Raab presented proposals in Parliament which could override the powers of the European Court of Human Rights. Earlier this month, the court blocked the government's plan to deport some asylum seekers to Rwanda. Well, our correspondent Andrew Wilson is following the story for us. Andrew, tell us more about this bill.
Well, this is something the Conservative government have had in mind for quite some time. It was in their manifesto for 2010 and for 2015 again. Now, with the majority in Parliament, it's their time, it seems, to make a move. This is all about the Convention on Human Rights, which is administered by the European Court of Justice in Strasbourg. Nothing to do with the European Union and nothing to do with Brexit. But member countries all sign up. And the UK in 1998, under a Labour government, created its own Human Rights Act, which was supposed to be a secondary examination of any legislation that came down from Strasbourg. The government now feel that's gone too far, that it confines the government's ability to act, and that it's become what they call too elastic, too open to abuse. Police time is wasted by people claiming that their human rights haven't been properly observed, and investigations become long and arduous and so on. And they say that removing these elastic developments or evolutions in the human rights practice in the UK is in fact protecting the public. Here's Dominic Raab, the Justice Secretary.
We will also expressly, Mr. Speaker, provide for greater weight to be given to Parliament's determination of the public interests set out in primary legislation when considering the interpretation of rights to ensure we are better equipped to protect the public. And that will reinforce our ability to, for example, deport more foreign national offenders, and in particular those claiming ever more elastic interpretations of Article 8 and the right to family life to frustrate the deportation process.
Well, Labour point out, and they've had plenty of time to prepare for this, because, as I said, they've known it's been on the Tory agenda for quite some time. Right now, in the High Court in London, what is being debated are these flights to Rwanda, something that the government wanted to put ahead. They wanted to start putting migrants onto these flights to Rwanda, and the European Court of Human Rights said that that is against the law and that they can't do that. That's just the kind of thing that the government is talking about. What the opposition say is that this is actually an infringement on people's rights. Looking at the way the government handled COVID, look at the way football disasters and stadium disasters and terrorist attacks are handled. They say all this is guided by an observation of protecting human rights. And this is something they say the government wants to take away.
It says everything about a Lord Chancellor and a government that is soft on rape, soft on rapists and hard on survivors, that they want to take away the final backstop available to victims to get justice. Women will be in no doubt. This is a government that lets off rapists and lets survivors down, and today is the proof. Mr. Speaker, this bill will see enormous amounts of red tape for victims of crime seeking justice. It's an attack on women, it undermines peace in Northern Ireland, it's the hallmark of a party out of ideas that can no longer govern.
So, Andrew, are we going to see this bill become law anytime soon?
Well, you heard Ellie Reeves there on the Labour front benches saying that the Good Friday Agreement in Northern Ireland is based on the European Convention of Human Rights. This is steeped into the way we do business in this country now, and there are plenty who are absolutely, actively and violently ready to protect this Rights Act continuing into UK law. So the government's going to have its work cut out, even with its majority, to get this through Parliament, through the House of Lords, back through Parliament again. It's going to be difficult. The fight for this new act will last some time, I fancy.
Andrew, many thanks. Our correspondent, Andrew Wilson. UK inflation has risen to 9.1% in the 12 months to May, its highest level in 40 years, as the cost of living crisis deepens. It comes amid soaring food, energy and fuel prices, with steep rises in the cost of bread, cereal and meat, a key factor in the latest increase. The Bank of England has warned inflation is on track to reach 11% later this year. Saudi's Crown Prince has arrived in Turkey for talks with President Erdogan aimed at boosting trade and diplomatic ties. It's the first trip to the country by Prince Mohammed bin Salman since the killing of exiled Saudi journalist Jamal Khashoggi in 2018. Khashoggi is believed to have been killed and his body dismembered in the Saudi consulate in Istanbul. His family and opposition groups have criticised the visit, which is expected to focus on defence contracts and a possible currency swap. Hundreds of thousands of people in China have been evacuated from their homes in southern and eastern provinces after heavy rain caused floods and landslides. Schools, offices and public transport were suspended in the key manufacturing hub of Guangdong. Roads, cars and homes were swept away in some cities. More rainfall is expected in the coming days. United States senators from both parties have reached an agreement on a gun violence bill after recent mass shootings. It's a step towards the first serious gun control legislation in decades. The bill, which includes more background checks for the youngest buyers and tougher penalties for gun traffickers, will be voted on later this week. A passenger plane has slid off the runway and caught fire after a crash landing at Miami International Airport in the United States. The plane was seen skidding on its belly after reports of a failure of its landing gear. 126 people were on the flight from the Dominican Republic. 3 were taken to hospital with minor injuries. Innovation and green technology were on the agenda as China's ambassador to the UK made his first official visit to Scotland. Edinburgh was the first stop for Ambassador Zheng Zeguang to see a China-Britain AI project. Our correspondent Zhang Nini reports.
The historic buildings of the University of Edinburgh are also home to Bayes Lab, one of Europe's largest centers of research into artificial intelligence, or AI. And this was Ambassador Zheng's first stop to see how robotics are being employed to solve challenges across sectors, including healthcare, industry, and space exploration. The lab has an ongoing joint program with Chinese tech giant Huawei to test the use of AI robotic systems with mobile phone networks.
I think it's great to see that collaboration is working very well. So we've got some projects that we are focusing on, especially in the AI and the robotics side of things. And the idea is if we can now keep that kind of, we call it the sort of dual dumbbell model, where there's a lab here, there's a lab there, and there's a collaboration across the two countries. That is what we're trying to push, and I think the ambassador was very happy to see that happen.
Researchers said the recent COVID travel restrictions have put a damper on bilateral cooperation in recent years, but hope the lifting of restrictions will see cooperation on AI robotics flourish.
Ambassador Zheng's visit comes as China-UK marks 50 years of diplomatic ties. While bilateral relations has weathered troubled waters in recent years, there's a willingness from officials from both countries for more understanding and cooperation.
Speaking at a lunch reception, Ambassador Zheng said China-Scotland cooperation remains a pillar of bilateral ties, and the two must work together to face significant challenges.
The pandemic is yet to be over. And now the Ukrainian crisis. The world economy is quite sluggish. But this is a time calling for cooperation, solidarity, and before that, above all, calling for peace. We would strongly opposed decoupling or so-called new Cold War.
The reception was hosted by the UK National Committee on China, an organization dedicated to promoting dialogue.
Since its inception, the UK NCC has been successfully, I think, bridging the gap in understanding between the UK and China, with the participation and support of both the British and Chinese governments at national and regional events.
And 30 miles outside Edinburgh, the ambassador visited another joint venture which strengthens bilateral ties. China's BYD, which makes electric vehicles and batteries, has been working alongside Britain's biggest bus builder, Alexander Dennis Limited, since 2015. Sales of the British-built and BYD-powered EV buses reached a milestone last month when sales of the electric bus reached 1,000. Zhang Yinyi, CGTN, Edinburgh.
Many parents in the United States have been struggling to feed their babies due to a shortage of baby formula. So an increasing number of breastfeeding mums are volunteering to help out. Milk banks say they're getting inundated with calls and emails with offers of donations. Our correspondent Sarah Walton has the story.
This is the scene that's greeted many parents in the US in recent months. Supply chain problems and contamination at a major producer have led to a shortage of baby formula. With their babies facing hunger, many families have been turning to breast milk banks that normally focus on helping premature babies or children on special diets.
We are seeing a major uptick in demand. So nationwide, I'm hearing that the averages are roughly about 20%. Of course, that varies from region to region. So what we are seeing is donors stepping up now during this crisis because they want to help. Our milk banks are getting lots of calls and emails from people who want to donate their breast milk to help more babies in need.
It is breast milk donation time.
Lucy Fink came forward to donate to the New York Milk Bank after she realised she was producing more than she needed to feed her son. She posted a vlog online to show people how to do the same.
Sometimes you just don't have enough to give it away, but if you are building up this freezer stash and you're aware of the fact that that milk needs to be used within 4 months, otherwise you shouldn't even be using it, then you might as well look into what would go into the process of packaging that up and giving it to some people in need.
Parents of babies raised on formula are advised to consult a paediatrician before switching to donated breast milk. Milk bank donors are normally asked about their health, and their donations are further analysed in a lab and pasteurised for safety before being distributed. The American Academy of Pediatrics discourages the casual sharing of breast milk because of the possibility of contamination. But some parents are going directly to social media sites to donate and appeal for milk. Community milk sharing group Eats on Feets advises people using their social media sites across the US on how it can be done safely.
Essentially screening donors and recipients, so asking questions, about any medications, supplements, blood work, dietary restrictions, things like that, just getting to know your donor and screening them. In the United States, most people get prenatal blood work done that covers STIs and most of the major infectious viruses. So if they've had that blood work done, it's really easy to ask, hey, did anything come up on your blood work? And a lot of donors automatically offer a copy of their blood work.
While the availability of formula in the US has improved, recent figures show shelves are still only about 3/4 full. It's estimated it could take another month for supplies to return to normal. Sarah Walton, CGTN, New York.
The headlines again. Warnings of a global economic crisis. Chinese President Xi Jinping hosts the leaders of Russia, Brazil, India and South Africa. At least 1,000 people are killed and others are feared trapped under rubble as an earthquake hits Afghanistan. And Russia commemorates its Second World War dead as its troops continue to make gains in eastern Ukraine. And that is the world today. Thanks for watching. We're on smart TV apps, Roku, Apple TV, Amazon Fire and Android TV, YouTube, Dailymotion, CGTN.com and the CGTN app, and in the UK on Freeview. We're back with more news at the top of the hour. Coming up next, it's World Insight. For now, from all of the team here in London, goodbye.